Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Thanks for tuning in today. Excited to be able to talk about this topic about accepting your situation with grace. I am going to be moving through today's topic pretty quickly, and but don't worry, I've got the notes, and if you'd like the notes, you can add yourself to the email list, and I will email you the notes. That link is contained in the notes for this live. Okay. Um, Accepting your situation with grace. I recently came across just some thought provoking content. And it started with material and conversation with others about things like our universe and the complexity of life. And so I'm going to start there, and then I'll talk more about our bodies, because that's how we're ultimately going to apply this to our situation, with perhaps experiencing the impact of a physical limitation. And as you know from maybe hearing from me before, how I work through and think about and apply things like this to help with the negative impact of rheumatoid arthritis on my life, and or difficulty I've worked through with having a daughter who was born deaf. And what is the benefit of this topic? What's the outcome? What's the goal? Well, what's really easy to get into when dealing with a physical limitation is anger. It's really easy to feel angry. That's a very natural place to go to, and it's also valid. Like, it's perfectly valid to have anger about whatever situation you're in or have to deal with, or whatever it might be. And so if you will explore this topic with me today, it might offer some perspective to reduce any anger. And maybe you're not experiencing a lot of anger. At the very least, what this topic will provide for you is some perspective. Just some perspective and some more tools to really help you navigate life when impacted by a physical limitation. So here we go. So much of this has to do with perspective. And so that's why I'm just going to share some stats about the universe, and then about our body. And I want you just to consider the perspective that this information offers. So here we go. Let's just talk about the magnitude of the universe. Do you know how many times the Earth can fit inside the sun? Do you understand? Have you ever considered that size difference? Of course, we know the sun is massive, but like, to really wrap our head around how big is the sun really? We can look at this stat about this relative comparison, because actually it's still even hard to compare, really to wrap our head around the size of the Earth, but it helps us in some way get a little closer to comprehending the vastness and the magnitude and the size of the sun. Because, I mean, at the very least, we can kind of consider how long it takes to fly, from continent to continent, and that demonstrates to some extent, or at least helps us comprehend how big the Earth is. And so if we take the Earth as a starting place for us to comprehend how large the sun is, that number of Earths that can fit inside the sun, what do you think it is? If you have any guesses, you can comment. How many times could we take the volume of the Earth, the size of the Earth, and just pack it inside the sun? How many Earths would it take to fill up the volume or the size of the sun? Okay, that number is 1.3 million. What? Can you even like begin to wrap your head around that? I can't. It's just unbelievable that, and it's massive. 1.3 million Earths can fit inside the sun. Oh my word. Okay. So one thing this demonstrates, or one reason why I like to just bring up this, like explore this data point, is because it helps me also put in perspective my life, my existence, my significance. It's like when I begin to just comprehend just a little bit the vastness of planets and the universe and space and all these things, I'm like, oh my word, I'm just this little tiny thing. I'm just this little part of this incredibly complex and amazing system. And so 1.3 million Earths fit inside the sun. All right. And then do you know how many suns there are? How many stars similar to the sun? I didn't look at this number, but I just know it's whatever. It's a whole lot. And then we have all of those galaxies. It's like they say it's. I've heard people talk about how the number of stars or galaxies is a number of the like grains of sand on the Earth. Like there are so many. There are so many. Whoa! It's just mind blowing to kind of just consider that, and it certainly offers some perspective of my life, my existence, in the context of the vastness of the universe. Okay, how about the next one? The age of the Earth. Do you know how old the Earth is? Well, according to some estimates, it's 4.5 billion years old. Oh my goodness. 4.5 billion years old. Again, my years of existence is just such a small part of that. It's like 0.000000000000000000001% of the existence of the Earth. That's how long I've been on the Earth. Okay, that's how long you have been on the Earth. 0.0000, all those zeros. 1% of the time of the Earth's existence have we been on it. All right, here's the next one. How long have modern humans been on the planet? Okay, again, I'm taking like very rough estimates and just the first result that shows up in Google, a Google search, 200,000 years. Modern humans. Okay, we have 200,000 years. That is wild. That is hard for me to comprehend. Okay, and then I started to think about, well, what does that mean in terms of generations? If we think about the evolution of humans, modern humans, if you look at the evolution of modern humans, Homo sapiens, how many times have we had creation and evolution of humans? How many generations have there been? Well, depending on how you define a generation, I'm going to give this broad range. It can range maybe from 12,000 generations to 125,000 generations. Which means that with each generation, with each person that's born, we have some way that humans have evolved, some way that certain characteristics or capabilities or adaptations are being manifest in the next person, right? And so, or we can also look at and think about disease and sickness, and I think about, of course, rheumatoid arthritis and those kinds of diseases. It's like, when were these introduced? I don't know. Maybe there's actually I could maybe look up that when were these introduced? Um, but you think about just the generations and the evolution and the time for things to go wrong in the body or things to go right in the body. Just the number of evolutions and instances that happened before me and that happened before you. That is wild to consider. All right. Let's see. Don't mind. I just got to grab a charger real quick. Okay. I'm going to keep talking. So let's now talk about the human body. The human body. How many cells are in the human body? This is the first result that I found on this one. 30 trillion. 30 trillion cells in the human body? What? Well, no wonder there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. No wonder we have so many errors that take place in the human body because there's so much chance for error. There's 30 trillion cells. And what that means, if you think about like cancer and or anything and everything, of course, happens at the cellular level to some extent. Wow. All it takes is one of those 30 trillion to go wrong, and now we have cancer. Isn't that right? I don't know. I'm not a medical expert, so don't quote me on any of this. But just the number of cells is quite phenomenal to begin to wrap my head around. Okay, how about? So I was thinking about my daughter who was born with hearing loss, and the problem with her ears is in the cochlea. And it's transmission of electrical signal to the hearing nerve. It's right in the cochlea where there's these hair cells and this electrical event takes place and a signal is sent through the hearing nerve. That process is failing in her ears. All right, so I just looked up how many hair cells are in the cochlea. 15,000? 15,000 hair cells? So there's 15,000 hair cells that could work incorrectly? Okay. Wow, it's incredible that we have any cochleas that work perfectly. Like mine. Mine are working. I have 15,000 hair cells that are working properly. Oh my word, that's a miracle. That is amazing. Okay, how about the human brain? Of course, that is the center that is also creating a lot of goodness in our body and can be causing problems in our body. Some things that you could be experiencing could be originally in the brain in some way. How many neurons are in the brain? 86 billion. What? 86 billion neurons in the brain? That's the same number of stars that are in the Milky Way. We have that many neurons. And of course, then there's so much more complexity about that, and we could just go on and on and on. The point is, I don't know, what comes up for you when you hear this kind of information? What kind of perspective does this offer you? Feel free to share your comments. What it creates for me is just, it's like what some of the things I've incorporated in my comments so far, which is like the chances of things working when you consider the perspective, the vastness of cells and all these, like the complexity that goes into a functioning body. Like, wow, the chances are actually quite low, right? And it's just a miracle, and it's incredible that anything works in my body. So that's one of my takeaways. And then the other is just related, it's just complexity in general. That's like the one other takeaway that I have from this, and like the some of the stats I shared before about the Earth and the size of the sun and the number of galaxies and all these things. It's like, oh, this is complex. This is so massive. I can't even wrap my head around it. And so what this also leads me to is just having a bit more perspective when I think when I consider my diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or any chronic illness, or my daughter who was born deaf. When I see that in the context of all of this complexity and vastness and generations of humans, I'm like, oh, wow, okay. I can see how that could be possible. I could see how that could happen. I could see how my blood and my blood cells could have this error that start to view bones as foreign objects and start to bring the immune system to attack that bone or that joint or whatever it is that's happening with rheumatoid arthritis. I'm like, I can understand within the context of all of this complexity that it's not so crazy that something like that would happen, right? So if you were born with a physical limitation of some sort, like I was born like with this history, this family history, this genetic imperfection or condition of rheumatoid arthritis. And if you were born with some physical limitation, here's what I have to offer to you. Nothing was stolen from you. Because that's the thing that's easy to get into. That's where our brains can easily go to. It's like, that's where I've gone to at times. I'm like, a life without chronic pain was stolen from me. A well-functioning body without this odd immune disorder was stolen from me. It's easy to go there and to be angry. Or I think about, but let me stick with that for a moment. But this is the thing. Again, how many generations of humans? 12 to 125,000, somewhere in that range, depending on how we define generation. But the point is, there's been so much that happened before me. Nothing was stolen from me. It just is. It just is the natural outcome of science, right? Of procreation, of science. Anyway, it's just like, nothing was stolen from me. No one took it away. It was always going to be that way. It's just reality. That's what I have to offer you. It was reality. A different body for me was never in the cards. It just never was. Sometimes I think it was. I'm like, well, if I could have been, or whatever, if someone, and you could look at whatever situation you're dealing with and you could start to blame people like, well, if they would have just eaten healthier, then they wouldn't have started this sickness that then got passed on, or I don't know. Whatever the situation is, you can look at like history and start to blame and consider how things could have been different, but all you're doing is arguing with reality. You're arguing with history. You're arguing with science. You're arguing with the past. And guess what? Who wins? Anytime you try to argue with the past, you lose. Every time. You cannot win when you're arguing with the past. You cannot win when you argue with the evolution or the workings of generations that came before you. For me, a body without rheumatoid arthritis was never in the cards. What about for my daughter, who was born deaf? There isn't family history that wasn't genetic. So I don't have like family history or genes to blame or whatever. That's just something went wrong. That's just it. It's like so when we talk about the number of cells in the body and the development of a body and how things are created, it's like all these things that have to go right. When we consider that, how many number of cells? Trillions of cells in a body and the workings of the body. I'm like, this is so complex. How ridiculous of me to think that it's ridiculous that she had a cochlea with 15,000 hair cells that didn't work right. It's like, that's ridiculous of me to think that. It's absurd. What is also absurd is that someone has a cochlea that works. Because it's just incredible that many hair cells would work. All of them work. Like all of my hair cells in my cochlea work. Oh my word. That is wild. So, the truth is she was born with some hair cells that don't work. That's it. That's it. I could think all day long that she was robbed of hearing. But you know what? That's just an argument with science, with chances, with history. Like she was born with hearing loss. I can try and fight that all I want and be angry about it all I want, but that doesn't change the fact that she was born with hearing loss. It doesn't change it. And it wasn't taken away from her. It just is the reality of human existence. It's the reality of imperfection. We are, like newsflash, we are embodied by imperfect flesh. And so every time we tried to argue with the past and tried to think that was stolen from me, I'm supposed to have a perfectly functioning body, you're missing perspective, right? And you are living in this imaginary world where we have perfect bodies. There's no such thing as a race of humans where 100% of their bodies are perfect. And then you might go to this place like, yeah, but why do some get a working body and I don't? Sure, you can ask that question. And you can be angry all you want and you can think that something was stolen from you. But again, you're arguing with the reality of your body and how you were born. You will lose that argument every time. What about situations where, maybe your situation is a result of negligence of another person or harm done by another person? Or maybe it's a failed surgery that resulted in your situation. Or maybe it was an accident, a car accident, or any other type of accident, some tragedy, or a sickness. Whatever it is, it was always going to happen that way. How do we know? Because it's what happened. It was always going to happen that way. Why? Or how do we know? Because it's what happened. It's like people will say, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. And I'm always like, well, wait a minute. If it wasn't supposed to happen that way, then it wouldn't have happened. But guess what? It did happen. So it was always going to happen. The negligence of another, the harm of another, a failed surgery, or whatever it was. People are like, oh my word, that wasn't supposed to happen. I'm like, well, but it happened. The reality is, it happened. And you can't change the past. Whatever thing you think you wish could have happened, or you wish could be different, you are imagining an alternative reality. It's a shadow of reality. It never was. It never existed. It is only something you've imagined. The past is the past is the past is the past. Reality is reality. It cannot be argued with. It cannot be changed. It was always going to happen this way. You're like, oh, but it could have been avoided. Sure. Maybe there's something that could have been avoided, but it wasn't. And as long as you keep thinking about how it could have been avoided, you keep living in this alternative reality that's just making you angry and upset. It was always going to be this way. It was never going to be avoided. Maybe you thought it was going to be different. And that's where we have grace, right? We think that it was going to be different. We think we should. And the grace comes in with just accepting that the past is the past, is the past, is the past, and it can't be changed. And what you thought was just wrong. We were just wrong about that. I thought that I was going to have a daughter, a third child in my family, that was born healthy and was born without hearing loss. I was wrong about that. That's all. And it's sad. And we give ourselves grace and time to like feel that hurt and that sadness, to be like, I wish it was different. But the past is the past is the past is the past. You know what I thought was just not the way it happened. I was wrong about that. So you can give yourself some grace with whatever you thought or hoped things would be, and accept the complexity of human existence, the perspective of our lives, and the reality of reality. That is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to hear any comments, any thoughts that you have. Again, what I start at the beginning is, and what I'll end with is that this perspective and this acceptance of the past and the acceptance of reality can remove anger, right? It doesn't remove hurt. There's still hurt. There is still hurt. And that's also part of our lives. But when we accept the past, then we can soften some of that part of our life that feels so heavy, some of the anger, feeling so upset, feeling that things were stolen from us. That part is what we can start to reduce. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. I'll speak to you next time. Bye, everyone.